I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow.
The monarchy did not crack in public first. It cracked behind closed doors, in a room where every breath suddenly felt dangerous. King Charles had faced scandal, grief, rebellion, and betrayal before, but nothing prepared him for the moment Diana's brother stepped forward, looked Camilla in the eye, and named the plot that William had been quietly fearing all along. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles felt the silence tighten before anyone dared to answer. The king had entered that private Windsor meeting, expecting discomfort, perhaps even anger, but not this. A private Windsor meeting meant a closed family discussion held away from public cameras, where sensitive royal matters could be handled before they became national wounds. This gathering was supposed to settle concerns about royal legacy, the shared memory, and public meaning attached to a royal figure after death, and the handling of Diana-linked family records, the private papers, letters, notes, and decisions connected to her life inside the monarchy. But the moment Diana's brother placed his hand on the table, the purpose of the meeting changed. He confronted Camilla in front of William, and accused her of secretly attempting to influence how Diana's private legacy would be controlled inside the institution that had already wounded her once. Camilla did not rise. She held her position, but the queen consort's stillness no longer looked calm. It looked defensive. Diana's brother spoke with the force of someone who had carried this accusation for too long, and he revealed how he knew it. A sealed memorandum from a documented private conversation about Diana's memory, preserved by a former family advisor, and passed to him after concerns grew too serious to ignore. The memorandum was not just paper. It was proof of a conversation no one in that room could easily dismiss. William stared at it, stunned but controlled, because the prince had feared something like this in silence. Now another man had said it aloud, and worse, he had said it where the future king could not pretend he had not heard. Charles gripped the chair beside him as if the room itself had shifted under his feet. The monarch had survived public storms, but this accusation reached into the most painful part of his past. He lowered himself slowly, saying nothing, while William watched his father's face change. Camilla tried to explain, but she could feel the balance slipping. Diana's brother had not come to create noise. He had come to force recognition, and once that sealed memorandum lay between them, the meeting was no longer about access, language, or records. It was about who had the right to guard Diana's name. But before the confrontation could be understood, the monarchy had to face the painful truth about who stood in that room, and why each of them was already carrying old wounds into a new war. This was never just about power. It was about memory, grief, pride, and the dangerous question of who gets to define a woman after she is gone. Charles stood between past and present. Camilla faced the shadow she could never fully escape. William guarded a mother's legacy, and Diana's brother entered not as a guest, but as a man who believed silence had lasted too long. Charles knew the accusation had not landed in an empty room. It had landed in the middle of every wound the royal family had spent years covering with duty, smiles, ceremonies, and careful language. The crown, meaning the institution of monarchy itself, rather than just the jeweled object worn at coronations, demanded calm from him. But the king was not only a monarch in that moment. He was a husband, a father, and a man standing before the emotional wreckage of choices that had never stopped echoing. He wanted to protect the palace from scandal, yet he could feel the past pulling him back toward the one name the family could never fully contain: Diana. William did not move, but the prince understood the danger better than anyone. He was Diana's son, the future king, and the one person in the room who could not afford to respond only as a grieving child. His duty was to protect family dignity and royal stability, because stability meant keeping the monarchy from breaking under public pressure. But his heart was somewhere else. He had already noticed unusual pressure around archive access, the permission to view or handle private family materials, and around ceremonial wording, the official language used in royal tributes, speeches, and public events. He had seen his mother's role being softened, narrowed, adjusted. Now Diana's brother was saying the quiet part aloud. Camilla felt the room turning against her before anyone raised their voice. The queen consort had survived years of judgment, but this was different because Diana's brother was not speaking as a critic from outside the gates. He spoke as family, and his controlled anger carried the weight of grief hardened into purpose. He did not shout. He revealed through a documented account, preserved by a former Spencer family aide, that he had been warned about pressure placed on future portrayals of Diana's role. That account, he said, matched what William had already feared. Camilla tried to keep her expression steady, but the more he spoke, the more the formal review became personal judgment. Charles had been warned privately that this confrontation might come. A senior courtier had told the king in a confidential briefing that Diana's brother was preparing to challenge the palace's handling of her memory, but he refused to believe it would happen in front of William. That refusal now looked painfully naive. The monarch glanced at his son and saw restraint, not peace. He looked at Camilla and saw defense, not innocence. And he looked at Diana's brother and understood that silence had not protected anyone. It had merely delayed the explosion. And the fuse had not been lit in that room. It had been lit months before, during one ceremony that everyone tried to dismiss until it became impossible to ignore. Every royal crisis has a moment people later pretend they did not notice. A glance too long, a sentence too carefully placed, a name left out where it should have stood. For William, the warning came during a memorial reception for Diana, when one small change in the order of remarks made the entire family feel as if history itself had been quietly rearranged. William read the revised tribute note before anyone else saw his face change. The prince had come to that Kensington memorial reception prepared for grief, not suspicion. Kensington mattered because it was tied so deeply to Diana's public life and private memory, a place where her name still carried warmth, sorrow, and unfinished meaning. The reception was meant to honor her charitable work, especially the causes she had made human through touch, voice, and courage. It was also meant to reassure her son that her legacy remained untouched inside the royal family. But one sentence had been changed, not loudly, not brutally, quietly, and that was what made it feel deliberate. Camilla had approved the revised tribute note, and that approval became the trigger everyone later looked back on with dread. A tribute note means the prepared written words used to guide remarks at a memorial or formal remembrance, and this one had softened Diana's personal role in a family legacy statement. Warm language about her compassion had been replaced with colder institutional wording about continuity of service. William stared at the phrase until it stopped looking like language and started looking like erasure. The future king did not shout. He did not challenge anyone in front of the room. He simply went still, because he recognized what had happened. His mother's voice had been polished down until almost nothing intimate remained. Charles dismissed it at first. The king called it administrative language, the kind of careful phrasing palace offices used when emotion threatened to become controversy. But Charles grew troubled when William refused to sit beside him afterward. That refusal said more than anger ever could. The monarch watched his son keep distance, and for the first time that day, he understood that the altered wording had not protected the family. It had wounded the one person the reception was supposed to reassure. Camilla tried to present the change as harmless balance, but the queen consort could feel the shift around her. William's silence was no longer obedience. It was evidence. Diana's brother received a copy of the altered note, weeks later, through a documented account from a former family representative who had kept the original version and the revised draft side by side. He marked that copy as the first proof that something larger was happening. Not a mistake, not a single bad phrase, a pattern. Diana's brother studied the change and understood why William had gone cold that day. From that moment, his grief gained direction. What began as altered wording at a memorial reception became something far more dangerous when Diana's brother decided the next silence would not belong to the palace. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. That made it worse. Diana's brother spoke with the calm of a man who had already decided what truth would cost him. Camilla sat rigid, Charles looked between them with growing dread, and William remained motionless, as if the future king knew that one wrong word could turn a family reckoning into a constitutional wound. Diana's brother stepped toward the table and laid down the altered memorial note as if he were placing a verdict before them. He did not look at the paper again. He looked at Camilla. The queen consort denied personal intent at once, but her voice carried strain beneath the control. She insisted the language had been meant to protect the monarchy, not erase Diana. The monarchy, meaning the royal institution and the public trust built around it, mattered because one careless internal fight could become a national crisis. But Diana's brother did not accept the explanation. He said protection had become a mask, and that mask had been used too many times whenever Diana's name became inconvenient. Charles felt the words strike deeper than anyone expected. The king had tried for years to keep old grief locked behind duty, but now the past was standing in front of him with evidence in its hand. He looked at William, and the prince's silence hurt more than anger. William wanted to defend Diana openly, to say what every tightened breath in the room already knew, but he understood the danger. If the future king lost control, the meeting would no longer be a family reckoning. It would become a wound in the crown itself. So he stayed still, and that restraint made the room even colder. Diana's brother then revealed the stronger evidence through a documented private routing note passed to him by a former palace staff member who had kept copies of internal review requests. A routing note means a written instruction showing where a document must go for approval before it can be released or used. This one showed Camilla's office had requested review over future Diana-related public materials, including tribute language, archive summaries, and family remembrance statements. Camilla tried to answer, but Diana's brother cut through the defense with one devastating line. This was not balance. This was control. Charles lowered his gaze, shaken by the discovery that he had not been fully told how far the review process had gone. The monarch felt betrayal rise beside humiliation, because ignorance did not make him innocent. It made him weak. Camilla saw that realization pass across his face, and for the first time, her denial no longer held the room. William saw it too. The prince knew the confrontation had moved beyond pain and into authority. And once the paper lay between them, the question was no longer whether Camilla had overstepped. It was whether Charles still had the strength to stop what had already begun. Power in the royal family rarely announces itself. It moves through signatures, schedules, access lists, and carefully worded permissions. That was what made this crisis so dangerous. The accusation against Camilla was not built on one dramatic act alone. It was built on a pattern, and Charles now had to decide whether loyalty to his wife could survive loyalty to the monarchy. William studied the routing note as if every line had been designed to hide its own danger. The prince no longer saw emotional discomfort. He saw an organized channel of influence, quiet enough to deny, but strong enough to shape how Diana would be remembered. Diana-related archives meant the private records, letters, drafts, and family papers connected to her life and legacy. Tribute language meant the exact words used in speeches, memorials, and official statements. Ceremonial references meant the way a royal figure is named during formal events, where even one removed phrase can change public memory. That was why the note mattered. It did not simply touch paper. It touched history, grief, and William's duty as Diana's son. Charles turned sharply toward the senior aide standing near the edge of the room. The king asked one question, and the directness of it cut through every careful excuse. Who authorized Camilla's office to review Diana-related materials? The aide hesitated. Fear passed across his face, because he knew the answer could wound the monarch in front of his son. He finally said the request had come through a channel marked Continuity Review. That phrase sounded harmless, almost dull, but continuity review meant a quiet internal check to make sure royal messaging stayed consistent with the palace's preferred version of events. In the wrong hands, it could become control, disguised as order. Camilla stiffened when the words were spoken. The queen consort understood that the phrase protected her advisors more than it protected her. Her advisors had framed their involvement as a routine safeguard, but Diana's brother rejected that instantly. He revealed through a recorded conversation with the former staff member who handled the review trail that the process had expanded beyond simple wording checks. To him, this was an attempt to place Diana's memory beneath Camilla's approval, and he said it without flinching. Charles looked at Camilla, then at William, and the room seemed to divide around his silence. The monarch could feel the choice forming before he spoke it. Loyalty to his wife had carried him through years of public judgment, but loyalty to the crown now demanded something harder, a boundary. William saw that decision rising in his father's face. Diana's brother saw it too, and Camilla saw the first sign that the protection around her was beginning to break. The answer did not merely expose a process. It pushed Charles toward a decision that would make the fallout impossible to hide. The first consequence was not public. It was private, and that made it cut deeper. Charles did not raise his voice. He did not accuse Camilla in theatrical language. Instead, he removed the one thing she had relied on most: quiet access. In that moment, the queen consort understood that the palace door had not closed loudly. It had closed permanently enough to be heard. Charles ordered the immediate suspension with a calm that felt harsher than anger. The king stated that Camilla's office would no longer have involvement in Diana-related legacy materials, archive requests, or tribute language. Legacy materials meant private records and official wording connected to how Diana would be remembered. Archive requests meant applications to view or use family papers, letters, or internal records. Tribute language meant the exact words chosen for memorials, speeches, and public statements. The decision mattered because Diana's memory was not just history to William, it was family, pain, and duty. It also mattered because the monarchy could not survive if the public believed Diana's story was being quietly controlled by the woman who had lived in her shadow. William supported the order, but the prince did not look victorious. He looked wounded. His face carried the weight of a son who had defended his mother and still felt no relief. Diana's brother accepted the suspension, but he did not soften. He revealed through a private interview recorded with a trusted family solicitor that he would demand written protection, not just spoken promises, because palace language could always return under another name. He wanted the issue sealed in writing, where no advisor could twist it back into routine procedure. William then asked for a family-led review panel, a small group trusted to check personal legacy matters, where Diana's sons would hold final consultation rights before any tribute or record connected to her private memory was approved. Camilla sat alone after the meeting and slowly removed her gloves, one finger at a time, as if each movement confirmed the new distance around her. The queen consort had not been publicly punished, but her isolation was real. She had lost the quiet access that once allowed her office to shape language before others noticed. Charles signed the instruction later, with a hand that seemed heavier than before. When the pen left the page, the monarch broke down privately, grief mixing with shame, because he had not seen the pattern soon enough. He had defended peace, but peace had hidden pressure. He had trusted process, but process had wounded his son. Yet the true shift did not happen when Charles signed the order. It happened afterward, when father and son were finally left alone with the ghost they had both been avoiding. For once, there were no aides, no advisors, no palace language, and no titles strong enough to hide behind. Charles and William stood in the aftermath of a confrontation that had torn open decades of unfinished pain. The monarch had lost control of the room. The future king had protected his mother without shouting. Now only a father and son remained. Charles closed the door himself, and that small act changed the weight of everything. The king did not sit at first. He stood with his back tense, as if the room had followed him from the confrontation and refused to let him breathe. William waited, not coldly, but carefully. The prince understood that this private moment mattered, because no council, aid, or office could repair what had been damaged between them. An institutional buffer means the formal layer of advisors, titles, and procedures that protects royal figures from direct emotional truth. Now that buffer was gone. The monarch had to speak as a father, and his son had to answer as the child Diana left behind. Charles admitted it quietly. He had mistaken silence for healing. He had mistaken procedure for protection. The words seemed to cost him more than any public statement ever could. The king said he had believed careful management would spare everyone more pain. But William's face told him the truth. Management had not protected Diana's memory. It had made her son feel as if he still had to defend her inside her own family. That mattered because Diana was not only a public figure, she was William's mother, and every softened phrase felt like another attempt to make grief behave. William did not demand punishment. The prince's voice stayed low, but the pain inside it was unmistakable. He told Charles that Diana's memory should never depend on who felt comfortable hearing her name. He wanted boundaries, clarity, and respect, not revenge. Boundaries meant written limits on who could shape Diana-related materials. Clarity meant everyone would know who held final consultation rights. Respect meant the monarchy would stop treating her legacy like a problem to smooth over. Charles listened, and when the future king finished, the monarch broke again. Not from weakness, from recognition. Charles agreed to create a written family protocol, preserving Diana's personal legacy from future internal interference. A family protocol means a formal internal rule that guides how sensitive royal matters are handled before decisions are approved. The king said Diana's sons would be consulted before personal tributes, archive summaries, or remembrance language could move forward. William did not smile, but something in his shoulders eased. Charles saw it and understood that this was not forgiveness yet. It was a first repair. But private healing could not stay private for long, because by morning, the country would see one image and understand that something inside the monarchy had changed. The palace tried to control the wording. The public understood the silence. By sunrise, Britain did not need every detail to know that a reckoning had taken place. One front page captured the mood better than any statement could. Charles pale beside William, Camilla absent, and Diana's name printed in a headline that felt less like gossip and more like judgment. Charles watched the broadcast alone, and the quiet around him felt heavier than any public scandal. The king had approved a carefully worded palace statement, confirming a review of legacy protocols and family archive procedures. Legacy protocols meant the internal rules deciding how a royal figure's memory, records, and tributes are protected. Family archive procedures meant the steps controlling who may view, approve, or shape private royal materials before they reach speeches, ceremonies, or public records. The statement mattered because it confirmed change without naming blame. It also mattered because the one office not mentioned told Britain almost everything. William understood the silence inside the statement before the public did. The prince knew Camilla's office had been removed from the revised process, and the absence of her name became louder than any accusation. By morning, a major London newspaper carried the headline, "Diana's Memory Defended," beside a photograph of William leaving Windsor with a fixed, grief-struck expression. The image cut through every careful phrase. It did not show victory. It showed a son who had carried pain into duty and come out changed. People did not need the sealed notes or routing trails. They saw his face, and they understood the emotional verdict forming. Camilla stayed out of sight, and that absence became more powerful than denial. The queen consort had not issued a personal response, but silence now worked against her. Outside Kensington Palace, a crowd gathered near the gates and laid white flowers in a quiet, symbolic response. Kensington mattered because the public still connected it to Diana's life, her warmth, and the wound she left behind. Some stood without speaking. Others held newspapers folded beneath their arms. The scene was not loud, but it was unmistakable. Britain had chosen memory over management. Charles listened as commentators framed the decision not as a palace adjustment, but as a moral correction. The monarch looked shaken because he knew the public had reached the heart of it. William had not simply forced a review. Diana's brother had not simply confronted Camilla. Together, they had exposed a line the monarchy could no longer cross. Charles felt the cost of that truth, while Camilla felt the cold edge of distance. And when the noise faded, one truth remained sharper than every headline. The monarchy had survived the confrontation only because it finally stopped asking Diana's memory to disappear. In the end, the confrontation did not destroy the monarchy. It stripped it bare. Charles broke down because the past had returned not as rumor, but as consequence. William stood firm because grief had become duty. Diana's brother spoke because silence had become betrayal. And Camilla learned that influence has limits when it reaches too far into the sacred ground of memory. Charles signed the final legacy protocol with the weight of a man accepting what silence had cost. The king set the pen down slowly, and the gesture carried exhaustion, shame, and surrender all at once. A legacy protocol means a written internal rule that protects how a royal figure's memory, private materials, and public tributes are handled. This one mattered because Diana's place inside royal history could no longer depend on comfort, politics, or quiet approval from offices that had their own interests. It also mattered because William had forced the monarchy to admit that memory is not harmless paperwork. Memory is power. Memory is love. And for Diana's sons, memory was the last place their mother still needed protection. William received the document without smiling. The prince read the final line, then his shoulders relaxed, just enough for Charles to see that the boundary was real. Diana related personal materials, tribute language, and family remembrance protocols would now require consultation with her sons before approval. Tribute language meant the exact words used in speeches and memorials, while family remembrance protocols meant the rules guiding how private royal memory is honored. William had not won in the easy sense. Victory would have felt too small for grief this old. But the future king had turned pain into authority, and Charles understood that his son had done what he himself had failed to do for too long. Diana's brother left Windsor without triumph. He carried the gravity of a man who had forced a painful truth into the open and knew the cost of doing it. Camilla accepted her reduced role in legacy matters, wounded but unable to reverse the decision. The queen consort had not been ruined completely, but her influence had reached its limit. Charles had not been redeemed completely, but the monarch had finally chosen protection over avoidance. And that was the emotional verdict. The monarchy survived because it stopped managing Diana's memory into softness and began honoring it with boundaries. This was the moment William's grief became royal authority, and Diana's name was formally protected inside the house that once failed to protect her. There was nothing left to question after that day. The crown had made its choice, and Diana's name would no longer be handled as a problem to manage, but as a legacy the monarchy was finally forced to honor. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.